Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, UCC 101, the basics of UCC searching and filing. My name is Anu Shah and I will be your moderator. Joining us today is Lacey Bower. Lacey works out of CSC's corporate headquarters in Wilmington, Delaware, and has been with the company for 9 years. She works with banks, lenders, lessors, attorneys, and corporations of all sizes. And with that, let's welcome Lacey.
Thank you, Anu, and thank you everyone for joining us for today's presentation of UCC 101, the basics. Before we get into the actual basics of UCCs, I do want to give you some background on CSC. For those of you who may not be as familiar with us, we are a pretty old company. We're about 117 years old. We're headquartered in Wilmington, Delaware. And the reason why we know so much about UCC is we've been working with them for over 60 years, pretty much since there was a uniform commercial code. Last year, we processed over 6 million UCC transactions, and we monitored about 8 million. CSC is currently the largest U.S. DOM provider of lien-related services. We also do things like registered agent, corporate compliance, entity management, and we're the largest corporate domain registrar in the world. For today's session, what I'd really like to focus on are some questions that we should be asking ourselves as financial professionals, the best practices for both searching and filing UCCs, monitoring our portfolio for changes that could impact filing position. We're going to talk about some free resources CSC has that you can use, as well as some paid resources. And we're going to put all this into practice at the very end with a demonstration. Finally, we will have question and answer at the end. So, as you have questions come up, like Anu said, please feel free to type them into that chat widget, and we'll get to as many questions as we can at the end of our webinar today. So let's start off with some questions we should all be asking ourselves as financial, legal, due diligence professionals. And that is, are you following the best practices for searching and filing every time? Do you know what the best practices are? Do you know how to file with your debtor name to make it sufficient? What sources should you be using to confirm debtor name? Are you monitoring your portfolio for the changes that can happen post-filing that could still impact you? With that said, let's start off where most transactions start off with, and that's with searching. So UCC searching it's really important. You need to know what position you might be in on specific collateral for any secured agreement. So first we're going to start off with how do you do your search? Well, you have to start with the name, and it really depends on what kind of debtor that you have. If your debtor is an individual, then the starting point for every UCC search is going to be their driver's license name. If they don't have a driver's license or an active state ID, then you could search on their surname and first personal name. But start with the driver's license. For your registered organizations like LLCs, corporations, you're going to use the public organic record, which will be their formation document. So articles of incorporation or any amended or restated articles. When you're doing a search and there are UCCs where collateral is administered by a decedent's personal representative, you're going to search the name of the decedent. And when you're doing a search for UCCs that are where the borrower or the debtor is listed as a trust, then you'll search on the name that's put forth in the trust document. If there is no name in the trust documents, then you're going to search on the settlor. And of course, the onus is on this, but searching out the state can be really hard. You kind of have to understand exactly how the state search logic works, how it's going to work in minute detail. Is it a starts with? Is it a keyword search? Is it a contained search? Is it Boolean? I mean, there's a lot of variables to searching out the state, and not all state search sites are created equal. You also have to understand how the search is going to perform under all circumstances. So are you going to need to search the borrower's name differently if it has a noise word in the beginning, like the? Does this state index their filings differently if it's e-filed versus if it's filed by paper or walked into a counter? And how does the state's historical indexing practices impact your search? You need to run two searches, one for pre-revised Article 9 and one for post-revised Article 9. Searching at the state can be really super risky. And so we talked about searching. So we feel good about searching. We know how to do a search. We know which name we're going to use. Let's talk about how to do the actual UCC filing. So with filing, just like in searching, the debtor's name is a big deal. So you have to understand how the 2010 amendments to UCC Article 9 changed how we look particularly at individual debtors, and then follow best practices for filing against both individuals and corporations or organizations. So let's take a look at individual debtors because this really changed quite a bit a couple years ago. So now, with the passing of the 2010 amendments to UCC Article 9, there really are about two options. There really are two options. Either the state you're working in uses the only if or alternative A approach, or they use the safe harbor or alternative B approach. The only if approach basically says that if the debtor's name, it must be exactly what's on their driver's license, their active driver's license. If and only if they have no active driver's license or state ID, would another name be considered sufficient, like, their surname and first personal name. So this is really strict for those of us doing filings. You need the driver's license pretty much anytime you're going to file on an individual. What's nice about it, though, is it makes it very consistent for everybody. And this is what most jurisdictions chose to enact, or if they enacted originally with the safe harbor approach, they actually moved to this later on. So let's talk about safe harbor. The safe harbor approach basically says that the name that's on the driver's license may be sufficient for identifying your debtor and putting on your UCC, but other names could work just as well, like the surname or first personal name. So this is alternative B. It's a lot more forgiving for us as filers, but it does create some issues for searchers. But there's really not that many states using it. So I'm going to pop up just a little chart so you can get an idea. All of the dark blue states are using the alternative A only if approach. The only safe harbor states left are those 5 states or 6 states there. So really, I would just get the driver's license every time, unless you only work in Wyoming or Colorado or Delaware, one of these states listed here. So just to give you some example of how important it is to have the correct debtor name, I want to go through just a couple of case studies that were summarized for us recently by one of our attorneys. And this is an example of pretty much making sure the name is correct down to the last little mark on the driver's license. So there was a borrower named Ronald Mark Ney, and he financed 2 pieces of equipment. His driver's license actually had a typo, and it had his middle name as Marked, M-A-R-K-T, and he filed bankruptcy. And the secured party actually lost its claim on the equipment because the name on the financing statement was found to be seriously misleading because it was missing the T. The bank had filed with his correct name, and the driver's license had a typo. That's kind of an extreme case. Not only is it important to get your the name exactly as it shows on the driver's license, you also have to put it in the right field. Here's another example. There was a gentleman named Stephen R. Voboril who had a deal with a bank where he had granted a security interest in a promissory note payable to him. The gentleman filed bankruptcy, and this filing was determined to be seriously misleading because his name was not properly provided. They actually the bank filed the UCC with his name in the organization field on the UCC record. So they didn't put him in the individual box. They put him in the organizational box. And because of that, the debtor's name was misleading. So again, these are kind of some strange cases, but really important just to get your name right and put it in the correct box. Now, I do want to mention briefly the savings clause. In both of these cases, the savings clause was brought up. And what the savings clause states is that if a search in the public record using that filing office's standard search logic on the correct debtor name discloses a financing statement that has the debtor's name with like a variation, the filing is not misleading. So if I run a search out of the state with the name that should have been on the filing and it brings up one of these filings with a variation, then the filing is still perfected. The Savings Clause didn't apply to either of these situations because of the way the name was put in on the one. It was in the wrong box, and it just didn't bring up. I guess it fell out of the state standard search logic in the example with Ronald Martinet. So searching on name variations is always going to be essential, and filing with the correct name is also going to be essential. So we want to make sure that we're all doing it the same way and using the name for the individual on the driver's license and putting it on the right box. So for corporate names, the best practice is check the public organic record. And like I mentioned earlier, for your corporations and LLCs, that is their formation document. If you're working with some entity types that are a little rare, like government charter entities, you're going to check the name that's listed in their charter document. If you have a business trust, like those commonly found in Massachusetts, you're going to look for the name that's in the record filed with the state under state law. And if you have an entity like a Fannie Mae or a Freddie Mac that was created by legislation, you would look at the name that's in the statute that created the entity. I just want to give you an example here of a financing statement that wasn't filled out quite correctly. So in this case, we had Alvo Grain and Feed. The Articles of Incorporation had the word "and" spelled out, and the debtor's name on the UCC had an ampersand. And the financing statement, again, was found to be seriously misleading, and the secured party lost a large claim because of the difference between an "and" spelled out and an ampersand. So we know what name we're going to file on, but now we need to talk about where we file in these things. So the general rule of thumb is that you're going to file in the central filing office, usually at like the Secretary of State, where the debtor's located. The exceptions to this will be Georgia and Louisiana because they don't have central filing offices. You file at the local level there. There's also collateral exceptions. When you have UCCs that have collateral like fixtures or timber to be cut or minerals to be extracted, those will be recorded in the same office where a mortgage would be recorded on that affected real property. So I guess what's really tricky about this is figuring out what constitutes location. So when I say where your debtor is located, what's that mean? Well, it depends on what kind of debtor you have. For an individual, their location would be their principal residence. If they do have multiple residents, maybe they're a snowbird, they spend half the year in Florida, half the year in Delaware, I would potentially file in both places. Doesn't hurt, protects you. For registered organizations, you're going to file where they're incorporated, not where their principal place business is, not where the collateral is, unless it's one of those collateral exceptions, but in the state of incorporation. When you have registered organizations that are organized under federal law, you'll file wherever that law tells you to file, or in the District of Columbia, if the law doesn't say. If you have a non-registered organization, you're going to file in the place of business, so the chief executive office, the state where that's located. And then if you're filing and it's a jurisdiction without filing requirements, so this would be entities that are not formed in the United States. Maybe you have a Canadian company and they're conducting business in the U.S., but there's no Canadian UCC. They have PPSAs, and if you need to file in the U.S., where do you file? Well, in this case, you're going to file in the District of Columbia, so any of those entities without jurisdiction. I mean, portfolio monitoring in general is just a way to get automated alerts when things change. I want to talk about the 3 different types of portfolio monitoring we do, as well as expiration tracking. So let's start with expiration tracking, because if your security agreements go longer than 5 years, most of you are going to need this at some point. Expiration tracking is just keeping track of when you did your original filing and getting notifications of when your filing is going to lapse. You can file a continuation of a UCC up to 6 months prior to the filing lapsing. UCCs, normal UCCs, or I should say average UCCs, that are not using an alternate filing type, like a public finance transaction, are good for 5 years, with the exception of Wyoming, where it's 10 years. So we will track anything we've done for you. and we can notify you when your filings are going to expire, so you can file continuations. We also have the ability to simply generate the continuations for you, or we have a tool that we're going to go through later that allows you to click a button that creates all your continuations in mass. But the number one thing we all probably are looking for post-perfection that requires a secured party's prompt attention would be a change to your borrower's name. We're going to go just look at an example here. So there was a company out there called Factory Direct LLC. It's a furniture company. Like most furniture companies, it had an ownership change. You always see that under new management. And the new owners changed the name to Lifestyle Home Furnishings. However, they failed to notify the bank that there had been a name change. And the bank didn't take any action to update their UCC or to amend it in any way. Then Lifestyle Home Furnishings filed bankruptcy. And that was problematic for the bank because they'd never updated the name. It was determined that the bank became unperfected 4 months after the name change. So updating a name is really important. Most of the cases I've read about say 4 to 6 months after a name change, you're probably not perfected anymore, but it's basically up to the court, so they would decide if you're perfected or not. Now, when it comes to monitoring names on an individual, that's really hard. There's no good way to do it. You're kind of at their mercy. But with corporate tracking, if you have a corporate debtor, we can absolutely track that for you. Anytime there's a name change, there's a filing done at the Secretary of State. So we can monitor for that. And if a company changes their name, they have a change in their status, like they fall out of good standing, or their entity ID number changes, which usually indicates they've dissolved or merged, we can send you an email with a before and after snapshot so that you're in the know and you can take the appropriate action if you have a financing statement filed. Now, we have other kinds of tracking as well, and these are more, I would say, specific to the type of business that you're conducting. For those of you who write into your security agreements that your borrowers are not to take additional funding until you're paid back, we can monitor for that by tracking for new UCCs being filed against your borrowers. So debtor tracking does exactly that. It monitors for any UCC filed against a specific debtor in a specific state. You get an email when there's a new UCC, and we'll tell you what kind of UCC it is, whether it's a UCC-1, a termination, a continuation, amendment, and that way you can evaluate that and see if it needs your attention. It's also nice sort of to track for terminations because we do see a lot of UCCs that get terminated by someone who should probably not be terminating them. So we also have a lot of companies that use that just to make sure that they're aware every time a UCC is filed on them. We can also monitor your borrowers for bankruptcy. Personally, I find this most useful when you have something physical you would want to recover in the event of a bankruptcy, like equipment. The letters from the bankruptcy courts usually take 7 to 10 business days. The notifications from this service usually arrive within 48 hours, so it's quite a bit faster. Basically, just monitor your borrower, whether they're a company or an individual, and send you an email if they head up against a bankruptcy proceeding. So we'll let you know what chapter the bankruptcy was, the name, the address, the court, the docket number, and if you want us to go out and pull the docket, we could certainly do it. Let's talk about some of the resources CSC has. We've been doing UCCs, like I mentioned, over 60 years, and so some of the common struggles that our clients have, they've shared with us, and we've tried to come up with some resources for you. The first I want to talk about is secured party representation. This is not a service for everybody, but we do a lot of work with customers in the alternative lending space and with leasing companies. And what they've told us over the years is that they have a problem with the public record becoming basically a marketing tool. They have a problem where their competitors will go out and search on their secured party name to pull a list of all their UCCs filed in a particular state. They can essentially market that borrower, that debtor, by acquiring their name and address. So we do have a service where we can represent you in the secured party box on your UCC to prevent that from happening. It is not designed to prevent like true masking of the filing. If we do get an inquiry, we would forward it to the true secured party of record so they could respond accordingly. But it is designed to prevent, mass searches or reverse searches on your secured party name to locate your customer list. CSC also has a really great website called Transaction Watch. It's just www.csctransactionwatch.com. Word to the wise, it is going to, in a couple weeks, be relabeled CSC blog. So that is coming, but the content will be much the same, and it's free. So basically, it provides you with an archive of any legislative or upcoming changes to not only UCCs, but also corporate and compliance and state filings. So if you would like to sign up to get Transaction Watch notices, or you want to use some of the white papers or filing guides or resources out there on Transaction Watch, you're certainly welcome to do so. If you are signed up, you'll probably get an email in a week or 2 or 3 just letting you know if they changed the name from CSC Transaction Watch to CSC Blog, but the content will remain much the same.
So folks, that is all the time we have today. Thank you, Lacey. It was a great presentation. If we didn't get to your question, we will contact you with a response after the webinar. Thank you to everyone who joined us. We hope to see you